Good afternoon again. I will be presenting one part of the results of the Italian side of the research on the field. We went and interviewed unaccompanied foreign minors, and then I will hand over to Gabby, and she will deal with the second part. We'll be mainly dealing with the communication needs of children as they came out of the interview. For our part of the CHILLS study, we used the same methodology and approach that our colleague Kati just illustrated. But we interviewed a different group of children, namely unaccompanied migrant children in second reception centers in Sicily. And I would like to take the opportunity to really wholeheartedly thank them for their kind cooperation. Mediterranean Hope Project, and in particular Casa delle Culture and Filotea Cooperative. Thank you for having us around for a couple of days. So, as Kati said before starting the interviews, all the participants and their legal guardians signed an informed consent and a data protection form. Furthermore, we gave all the children the possibility to be interviewed in their mother tongue or with a cultural mediator. For your understanding, with the expression cultural mediators in Italy, we mean a profile that is between a public service interpreter and a caseworker, more a caseworker who, among other tasks, is entrusted also with interpreting. And they're usually migrants themselves. This is the composition of our interviews. You can see the different countries the unaccompanied children came from. And our two mediators, the ones who actually interpreted for us, had arrived as unaccompanied migrant children themselves. They had learned Italian, they were trained in Sicily, and they were experienced in interpreting for migrants and refugees, both adults and children. For one of the teenagers from Bangladesh, there was no Bengali mediator available in the whole island, but he also spoke Punjabi and English, and so the interview was conducted in English. For all the other children, 8 out of 15 wanted to be interviewed using their own knowledge of Italian, which unfortunately often turned out to be very poor, and we'll come back to that later. And the remaining 6 were interviewed with the help of these two cultural mediators in Arabic. Now, just one word on why these children are particularly vulnerable. Besides being children in general, and being migrant children in particular, these were also unaccompanied, especially the elder part of the group, which means they had passed through the hardships of migration, being mainly on their own, and in many cases, their language proficiency was rather poor, also in the mother tongue, something we had not at all envisaged before the interviews. And also in the vehicular languages that we used, there was Italian for them, and for the Bengali boy, English. They were not proficient as well. Now, as our veteran colleagues, we asked mainly for facts and figures of what had happened after their arrival in Italy, and at least to some degree what had been their perception of the reception process and the interlanguage communication involved with it. So these were the main questions. What happened when you arrived and you spoke no Italian? Where did you stay or go? Whom did you meet? Could you understand and make yourself understood? And we also asked if they could remember a specific situation about the languages used during the process and the typology of interpreters they met. Now, we're generalizing a bit here, obviously, but in general, it turned out that the unaccompanied foreign minors knew the names of places where they were taken. They could tell them in Italian correctly. They all remembered being transferred from a first reception center to a second reception center, although they couldn't classify them as first or second reception centers. And they all remembered having met the police and a physician, but most children couldn't tell the precise sequence of the reception process, nor the function or the role of many of the persons they had met. They had no idea of why and what was going on and what was going to happen to them during the first days after their arrival. When they were questioned about the process, the Bengali boy tried to motivate his knowing these things by saying, because it was the first time I came to Italy, as if he should have tried to possess or acquire that information instead of having the right to receive it. So this is what we gathered from their answers to what they understood of the reception process they were in. Coming to what languages they used or they came in contact with. An interesting aspect was the multiplicity of language combinations used by these children, as you can see on the slide. There was not just interpreting between their native language and Italian, but a sort of a puzzling mosaic made of native, incomprehensible, vehicular, newly acquired and completely unknown languages. Not to mention the fact that many people in Sicily don't use standard Italian, but they mix it with dialect, which can become not easily understandable for non-native Italians. So the best case scenario we ran into was a child who met an interpreter with whom she shared a native language and who, on his side, spoke Italian reasonably well. While the worst case scenario was the Bengali child using a badly known vehicular language, Punjabi, which was a vehicular language also for the guy acting as a volunteer interpreter, though speaking only very broken Italian. So there's a lot of variation there. Now, the items that will come into the slide are in reverse order from appearance. I mean, the quantity is smaller for the first category that you will see. What we discovered was that the people who, in a way or another, satisfied the communication needs of our unaccompanied migrant children were everything but trained interpreters. There were mediators who had attended vocational training but had no specific training in interpreting. And not to forget, they have a much broader profile where they have very many functions that at times can be even conflicting. Then there were staff members of the reception centers or even volunteers using vehicular languages. For instance, one of the boys, a boy from Ivory Coast, said there was a lady who spoke a bit of French and I could speak French to her. And then the largest group was definitely the fellow migrants or peers who knew other languages or who knew some Italian. And now I will hand over to Gabi.
Sorry for this. Just in the meantime, I could just punctualize one thing Amalia said. She rightly said that we had a large number of minors we talked to. Not all of them were unaccompanied minors. You have seen the age. There were some very young children, and these children had come to Italy in humanitarian corridors with their families. So the youngest children are a separate group. They were not unaccompanied. They were with their families, and we put them together because we wanted to see the whole situation of children thrown into such a new situation. The difference with the other children you heard talk about earlier is that they really had come to Italy very a short time ago, and so they still knew very well how it was when they didn't understand anything. Now I see you shared the screen.
But, but I can see you. You have your
You can
camera
see me
on.
now. Okay, so try to go ahead with the slides. This is the last one you had, and now if you go ahead. So here we are. Besides and beyond this background information Amalia gave you, by far the most interesting part of our study was the qualitative content analysis of the children's and teenagers' interviews. So now, from now on, this yellow triangle is, so to speak, the child. We tried to reconstruct the situation, looking at it through their eyes. Through the eyes of a person of his and her own, with her and his own interests and rights. And what we try to reconstruct is what came out from what they told us. And I remember again, they sometimes the language they spoke mainly when using Italian was very basical, so it's not so articulate and profound as have you heard from the children from Belgium. But I think the main things came out very, very clearly. So what we saw in the meta-analysis was that basically the children's needs which emerged were of three kinds. One is information needs, as you see it, exchanging information, expressing basic needs, getting basic knowledge. The second kind of needs were emotional. It's the need of expressing emotions. And the third one was the need to establish and maintain interpersonal relations. But all three needs imply communication, imply language communication with other people as a crucial tool. And at least in the first phase of their stay, right after their arrival in a foreign country, this necessarily requires the presence of somebody who interprets for a child. And not to forget, this very first phase has been recognized also as the most crucial one for the future steps that child will take, the way it will go on. So let's see what communication needs came out from what they told us. And please note one methodological thing before, in advance. As only one interview was conducted in English, for all other quotations here, we show you only our back translation into English. And I also added some punctuation marks, which usually you're not supposed to do in transcripts, but I wanted to make it easier for you to read it. As I already said, the first need is exchanging information, which means primarily expressing basic needs and communicating essential information to others, like asking for a bathroom. I could not even say I needed to go to the toilet, or telling one's date of birth, for example, to a person who wants to know it. I had difficulties because the mediator spoke his dialect and it was fast. He got my date of birth wrong. Even if you have an interpreter, sometimes you feel you can't communicate. Then another example from a Syrian girl who arrived to Italy with her parents in primary school, remembering her first days in school when she didn't know Italian yet. She says, and meaning when the cultural mediator who sometimes were there at school and translated for these children, she said, only when the teacher speaks, which means not when I would like to say something. Or she said, it's interesting, when I wanted to go to the toilet and don't know how to say it, I listen to my schoolmates, how they say it. Also, as for receiving information, not understanding anything during the very first hours after the landing of a boat packed to the rafters with migrants or people fleeing war is quite normal. And you see, at first on my arrival, we didn't understand anything. But more problematic seems to me the fact that a teenager is not informed about the support which is available, but he or she doesn't know of. As for example, when they told us, I did not understand that there was a psychologist in the beginning. That means in that moment when he was most needed. This is the cultural mediator 2 years after, remembering his first arrival and what happened then. Still receiving information, we perceived a large information gap concerning the most crucial information for an unaccompanied child, in this case, or adolescent, when first arriving alone in a foreign country. The questions are what I'm supposed to do and what is going to happen to me. And what we heard is, for the first 2 nights, I did not know what I was supposed to do. Or a boy asked the mediator where he was taken and if he was going to be sent back to his country. So also the most stringent, the most important questions, which are often left without an answer. Expressing emotions is the next communication needs aspect. Emotions were really crucial. Expressing one's feelings, talking to a grown-up person who speaks your language, was spontaneously recognized as a very important means to control anxiety, anger, and repressiveness. So, for example, one told us in the beginning, immediately, I missed my family, I missed this. You fall into a crisis. When we fall into a crisis, if the mediator is there, you can make things work directly. With mediation and other means, you can vent your feelings directly by speaking. Obviously, in many interviews, these categories I mentioned and we throw apart were mentioned are intertwined. So rather obviously, the need to understand and make oneself understood often go together. In the beginning, immediately, I missed my family. I missed you fall into crisis. Yeah, we had that. But also, let me see the other one. The next one, I got angry because intertwined need. Okay, go ahead. The second one, the first one we read already. I got nervous because I could not even say I needed to go to the toilet, or I got angry because it hurt and I couldn't even tell the doctor. So not having a way to make yourself understood, and this having an immediate effect on how you feel on your emotions. And this emotion of angriness, of stress, of nervousness came out quite often. Then human relations. Not being able to communicate puts the child into a condition of extreme powerlessness. So one young girl had told us, when I arrived, remembering, if you have no one who is, let's say, close to you, I mean, who helps you translating things, how can you go on, especially in the beginning when you have just arrived? A grown-up person who speaks your language can easily become similar to a significant adult, if not to a mentor. And one young man speaking about a mediator he met says, this mediator, he was always calm, and when he saw us, and he means the young male unaccompanied migrants, when he saw us angry, he made us talk. Feeling understood creates a sense of belonging, of familiarity, of getting back to some sort of normality. For example, he says the mediator was Tunisian and I'm Egyptian. He was not acting as a simple mediator. We made a family. And in the end, it can lead to a new stage of self-awareness and understanding one's situation, as you can see in the words of the young mediator remembering an interpreter he had met during his first weeks as an unaccompanied minor in Sicily. And he says, this mediator I met, He made me understand, for instance, that if you use your brain, if you keep calm, everything will work out fine. Then going ahead, we have another quote from a young girl's interview. And this is about feeling understood and also of about developing trust. We have heard that already. She says, when the judge asked the question, so this is already when she is seeing a judge, I already understood him. He spoke Italian, I understood him, but I'm answering no. But next to me, there was X, the name of the mediator, who translated for me. I wanted to answer the judge, but I said to myself, no, better if he answers. So she is learning Italian, she is becoming autonomous, but there is a relationship of trust which she still recognizes as important. And she knowingly uses the service of the interpreter in this case. Now we leave our young interviewees and get back to our observation of the general situation of interpreting services offered to, and I stressed it, to the minors, to the migrant children we met in Sicily. I don't want to generalize, obviously. In our research, we came to the following conclusions. Interpreting is offered mainly where and when institutions need it, for identification in asylum hearings, to talk to a judge. It's not so often offered where and when the children would need it or would need it most. Second, many mediators are part of the full-time staff of reception centers, and they have many other functions to fulfill. So there are never enough of them with all the languages required, and the few hours devoted to language mediation are being cut down even further. According to the new rules we learned a couple of months ago, now mediation services are offered for 10 hours per week for every 50 people in a reception center. I let you imagine. And this was before coronavirus. I don't know the situation, how it has evolved now during the last months, but hardly for the better, I fear. So moving to my conclusions, one keyword which became very important to us during this research project is resilience. You have heard it already. Some of the children and adolescents we met were extremely resilient, while others seemed not to have the physical and mental energy to react. But all children we met had one aspiration in common. All interviewees preferred or would have preferred to communicate without an interpreter. And all of them were desperately striving to do without him as soon as possible, which means becoming independent by learning the local language. But how to do that? Perhaps it's worth quoting again the little Syrian schoolgirl's recipe for language acquisition. When I don't know how to say it, I'll listen to my schoolmates, how they say it. And now all our interviewees went to school or followed language classes. Only 2 little girls mentioned learning language from teachers, which should make us reflect, because everybody says, yes, they must learn Italian language classes and so on. But what came out from what they said, we get it that they mainly learn the language from their peers, from friends, from other young people like them. And in turn, those who have at least some command of Italian immediately help those who need help. So they become interpreters for their own. For other children, they become language brokers, as researchers say. And also the Syrian children told us that they help the other ones who just arrived in school, and obviously also their parents in everyday life. So perhaps the most important result of our study, therefore, was this: language assistance through an interpreter is only a temporary need for unaccompanied, or in general for migrant children, upon their arrival in a new country. But having the assistance of an interpreter in this phase is of crucial importance for children in order to understand their rights and to make them effective. So when communication matters most, we need to bring a voice and give a voice to children. Thank you. And thank you from my side, I think from all of us, enormous thank you to our interpreters who really who made the impossible possible once again. I am an interpreter too, and I had to struggle to listen to some of the speakers because of technical problems, because of microphones, and so on. I have heard how much your services are appreciated from the people who are following, at least what I heard is in Italian. So thank you so much for making the impossible once again possible.